Uncharted 4 recently came out and I had a really good time playing through it. So since this marks the end of the series, I thought it would be fitting to look back at a set piece that has sort of come to define the Uncharted games for me. That would be the Convoy chase scene that has appeared in each one of the games, and today I'd just like to do a small video examining them and showing how they've progressively evolved in complexity. These sequences are defined by their mobile nature and combat against an assortment of vehicles such as jeeps and motorcycles, and as we go on you'll see the way they build upon each other, trying new things until they master the formula, creating a truly great gameplay experience. It all started very simplistically in the first game, Uncharted Drake's Fortune, where the sequence was just a rail shooter section. Drake escapes from a prison cell with the help of Elena while manning a machine gun and grenade launcher to blow their pursuers away. It's an incredibly scripted sequence that worked more as a tech demo for the PS3 back when it came out in 2007. Vehicles explode and go flying everywhere, trees fall over when shot, and it's just a visually impressive sequence due to the amount of vegetation being rendered at once. It's more of a sightseeing tour really, with cinematic camera angles punctuating certain moments, and you don't have any real control other than aiming. There really isn't that much special about this sequence, and even the concept of a cinematic vehicle shootout was topped just a year later with Metal Gear Solid 4's motorcycle chase that took the concept to a whole other level with crazier events and unique camera angles for every bit of it. That basically was an interactive cutscene, while this is just a simple rail shooter sequence with some fancy camera work at times. It's serviceable in terms of gameplay and it's cool seeing vehicles explode, but other than that, it's only noteworthy because it shows how the first Uncharted would have handled a scene like this. Because it's such an early PS3 title, it's very limited in its design and wasn't able to pull off the freely playable mobile action sequences that the series became acclaimed for. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves is where it gets really good. Drake and Elena pursue Lazarevich's forces as they transit to a nearby temple after destroying a village in search of the lost entrance to Shambhala. After being knocked off their vehicle, the player begins the level hanging from the side of a truck, and from there they're free to jump from vehicle to vehicle to avoid foes and make their way to the front of the convoy. This is such a step up from what was possible in the previous game, creating a seamless experience where the player is in complete control of their normal moveset and the environment around them blazes past them. This sequence is also highly scripted, but not in a way that takes your interaction out of the equation. Vehicles will get damaged and explode according to how the developers wanted the level to play out, but it's still up to you to survive against enemies and jump to safety when your vehicle is on its last leg. What Uncharted 2 excelled at was letting you play intense action sequences, not just vaguely influence a series of cutscenes, and that's what this scene exemplifies. Out of all of the sequences I'm talking about today, this one has my favorite setting, as I'm a huge fan of snow levels, and the way its environment naturally cycles from area to area is really impressive. This was also done in the train level from earlier in the game to a more noticeable degree, but all in all it creates an experience that's a little more personalized to the player's speed of progression, as opposed to the first game's one way of playing out visually. The scene even ends with its own rail shooting segment with a grenade launcher. Look familiar? This sequence is just scripted enough to make it feel tight and high tempo, but not too scripted that it makes it feel like your participation isn't actually needed, which is a problem I have with the third game's design as a whole. Surprisingly, the convoy scene from Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception is one of the more open and dynamic levels in the game. Drake teams up with a group of desert nomads to pull off an assault on one of Marlowe's convoys that have taken Sully captive as they make their way to the hidden location of Aram of the Pillars. The scene opens up with a very linear sequence on a horse where you're basically holding up on the analog stick as you make your way through a path in the mountains. Thankfully, the area opens up as you converge with the convoy, and from there you're pretty much free to ride around the area, jumping onto trucks and taking out enemies, or just shooting from your horse. This is basically a sandy version of the scene from the second game, but with a horse added in to allow even more mobility and choice on the part of the player. You can jump back onto your horse from any angle, so it's basically up to you whether you want to fight out in the open on your horse or on a vehicle behind cover. The only downside is that because of the added horse, the sequence is a little slower paced, as you have to jump back onto your horse, let Drake situate himself, and then ride along to the next set of vehicles to continue. The setting also takes away from the intensity of the scene, because instead of having the action take place on a snowy cliffside blazing past you, a majority of this one takes place in a flat open desert. Overall, the sequence is still solid and offers a more dynamic experience than a lot of other set pieces in the game. There are a few cutscene intervals in here that don't pull you out of the experience too much either, and this part where you have to get picked up by your partner before meeting back up with your own horse again is a cool way to break up the action. It's a good improvement over what the second game set up, and of course I gotta give them credit for trying to make the sequence even more interactive, but this one just doesn't stick with me as much as the second games. It just isn't as memorable in my opinion, and maybe that's because, like a lot of Uncharted 3, it's pretty derivative of the second game, and desert levels just don't interest me as much. Naughty Dog revisited the idea of a rideable horse in their next title, The Last of Us, and it's interesting to look at how their implementations contrast between the two games. It's cool to think that this sequence probably helped Naughty Dog familiarize themselves with the look and feel of controlling a horse, resulting in some of my favorite moments from that game. But enough of that somber, realistic stuff. Uncharted 4: A Thieves End blasts onto the scene to show that Naughty Dog has only gotten better at creating over-the-top yet totally player-driven action sequences. The scene from this game follows a series of intense set pieces including Drake falling from a tower, shooting his way through a marketplace, and driving through a hillside town while being chased by an armored vehicle with a mounted turret. Without taking control away from the player, this chapter seamlessly transitions from gameplay style to gameplay style as you make your way down to where Drake's brother Sam is being pursued by a group of vehicles. Drake hooks onto one of them while Sully takes the wheel, and after trying to avoid some debris in the water, the convoy portion begins. This whole sequence takes into account the established rope mechanics of the game, so you already know that you have the ability to climb up and down whatever rope you're holding onto and influence where you're swinging. At any point you can shoot too, so as you're sliding around the ground crashing into things, you're climbing up your rope at your own pace in control of your trajectory and able to take out enemies driving around or on the back of vehicles. As you make your way up the rope, Drake transitions from sliding on his stomach to sliding on his feet, and progressively gets high enough for you to swing yourself onto the back of the truck you've been hanging from. This is when the scene opens up into a really great mixture of Uncharted 2 and 3 while also throwing in some flair all its own. As a baseline, this sequence takes the high tempo pace and total control of the second game, but from there you have options branching off from it, and while you could just shoot your enemies from cover, one of those options is to jump right onto one of your pursuing vehicles and seize it for yourself. Uncharted 4 has really amazing animations, and one thing that impressed me is how Drake would change how he took over an enemy vehicle based on how you landed on it. From there it becomes a driving sequence, similar to how Uncharted 3 used its horse, and you're able to catch up to other vehicles and drive them right off the road. It's up to you how you want to proceed in this sequence, because not only can you just continue to drive around, but you can actually jump from the vehicle you're driving into other ones around you, or just use your grappling hook to get yourself back onto one of the larger vehicles. You can also just choose to turn around and drive away, which was something you weren't allowed to do in the scene from the third game. As you make your way closer to Sam, enemies will even begin jumping from the back of motorcycles onto your vehicle to try to throw you out, distracting you from where you're driving and forcing you to knock them off so you can focus. They're dynamic too, as you actually have to be in their range for them to jump on you, and they'll miss or fly off depending on how you're driving or if you're bumping into things. This is where the convoy section of this ongoing action sequence ends. It keeps going from here into a motorcycle rail shooter section before the chapter ends, but that's not part of what I want to focus on here. From a simple rail shooting section to a dynamic chase sequence based on sliding around on a rope in freely controllable vehicles. This type of scene has evolved greatly throughout the series, and it's fitting that the franchise ends with the best iteration Naughty Dog could whip up. Blending the intense scripted vehicle hopping from 2 with the player choice and mobility of 3, Naughty Dog was able to create a scene that played to the strengths of both while eliminating their shortcomings. These scenes are short, but they're fun bursts of excitement that have always been impressive from a technical standpoint. These could have ended up just being cutscenes with button prompts slapped onto them to simulate player input, but they're not. Uncharted 4's convoy scene specifically is a testament to player interactivity and is probably the best example of a scene of this nature done right. Not only is it incredible from a technical standpoint how they managed to make all of these animations and effects blend together so well, but the fact that it's all completely playable and has branches based on player choice is even more impressive. I've played through it a dozen times to see how many things I could do and get away with, and it holds up really well. I don't know if we'll ever see a scene like this done so well again, but if this is the swan song for this kind of game, then I'm glad it ended on such a high note. Kudos to Naughty Dog for being able to pull this off and not turning it into some barely interactive Simon Says game, which would have been so much easier to design. If you're like me and love to admire the work that went into a scene like this, then I really suggest giving it a try. This series was a fun ride, and I have a lot of fond memories playing through it. While some people like to believe that this series was too non-interactive, it was the exact opposite that made me enjoy it so much. I'm glad I got to share my thoughts on the games through this video and explain one of my favorite reoccurring sequences from them. By the way, let me know if you like this type of video and whether you'd like me to do more design-oriented videos in the future. And of course, thank you all for watching and see you all next time. Please consider supporting this channel on Patreon if you want to help me continue to make videos like this.